Hey everybody, before we start the show, I wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Kobold Press and the Pocket Edition of the Creature Codex. Do you love the Creature Codex so much you want to keep it close to your heart? Well, guess what? Now you can. Get nearly 400 foes from the original Creature Codex for half the price, just $24.99, in a smaller softcover version of the book that is more convenient and portable. Great imaginative creatures are in the book like the Keg Golem, Shark Bowl Ooze, Bar Brawl, Hierophant Lich, Wasteland Dragons, and hundreds more, some of which were designed by me. That's right, James Introcaso, yours truly. It's all play tested and built by the industry's best designers, and also me. Find out more at koboldpress.com and tell them DSPN sent you. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I am talking with Josh. He is a podcaster and one of the best. I was on his show, Nerdy People Play D&D. It's a lot of fun. So here is my interview with him where we're going to talk about all kinds of different things. Running games, having a blast. You got to hear about his different take on a lot of different things. He's a very good guy. He uplifts so many voices in the community, and he is someone you should absolutely follow. And good Lord, is he entertaining. Here's my interview. Okay, everybody, now I am here with one of the brightest spots of the RPG community. It's excellent to have you here. Josh, for people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
My name is Josh. I run the podcast channel Nerdy People Play D&D. We currently have 3 shows on that podcast channel because clearly I don't have enough going on in my life. Let's not get into Josh's personal life. It's insane. I run a little show called Better Homes and Dungeons, which you've been on, James, and it was great fun. I'm currently also doing a somewhat fortnightly updated run through Kobold Press's Margreave campaign. Which is great, and it reading it through it is like, my goodness, this is the minimum quality I now want to see in everything that I read. And the weekly thing is, we usually do a Curse of Strahd, but he's a railway baron, and Josh is rewriting lots of. It's like a western. Which I think is a bit of fun, and but at the moment we're currently playing Lasers and Feelings. With one of the player character people's, Tyler, taking over DMing for 2 reasons. One, he said, "Hey Josh, is it okay if I run something?" And I'm like, "Dude, absolutely. I want you to. This is like the master watching the student become the master. It's great." And also because, look, it's good to take that time away from having to try and run everything all the time, and just let yourself relax and play an idiotic quokka-based pilot, rather.
Yes, absolutely. 1,000%. I agree with all that. I really cannot wait to dive into podcasting. But before we get there, I want you to take me back to when you first laid hands on a tabletop RPG. What were you playing? What was the experience like? Were you the GM? Were you the player? Lay it out for me.
I was the player, and it would have been about 1987 or 88. It was with the original red box that came with the powder blue dice, where you play as a fighter going to take on the evil wizard Bargle. And you meet a cleric, and she does not come out of it okay. And I recently, like a couple of years ago, bought that for my older brother as like a Christmas present, saying, "Thank you, you got me started in this mess." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm not necessarily proud of that." So yeah, that's when I got started, and I played quite a lot of D&D with my friends with 2nd edition, and we played very, very badly, very fast and loose with the rules because, we didn't know what we're doing, but we were just having a good time rolling dice and making up silly stories. cut to many, many years later. Like in high school, I changed countries, changed high schools, didn't know how to get back into the hobby. And then about 3 years ago, so I don't want to tell, actually, there's like 20 odd years between gaming, which is, my God, that makes me feel old. And a couple of years ago, I decided to get back into it because of things like the Penny Arcade Acquisitions Incorporated thing, and listening to God's Fall with Ram Vatien, and listening to How We Roll, and just realizing, my God, these people are having good, stupid fun. I want to have good, stupid fun with some friends. So first I'm going to have to find some friends. And I've just come out of doing a degree. So yeah, working full-time and studying full-time with a small child means you've got no time. But when you give up studying full-time, it's like, okay, I've now got time. I need to do something that I love doing with this. And so I just started a game for a podcast's sake. And that's still available with Nerdy People Play D&D. We had a bunch of podcasters all join up. And really, it is the tale of one person learning how to dungeon master. 4 or 5 people all learning how to play D&D, but also 4 or 5 relative strangers actually learning to be friends. And what amazed me is that, you know, with the internet as big as it is, with the diverse amount of people that you find on there, wonderful and terrible, sometimes in equal measure, although I think there's more wonderful people out there. Like, that's my personal experience, but I say this as a cis, hetero, white dude, so like the amount of terrible I'm exposed to is much lower than a lot of other people, and I'm aware of that. Finding 5 people who all just got along wonderfully was like, this is like, knowing that, it is one of the most heartwarming things for me to go back and listen to an old episode.
It's really interesting that you have a chronicle, right, of how RPGs have brought you together with a group of people who are friends now.
Multiple groups now, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Why did you decide when you were getting back into it that you wanted to podcast as opposed to, play a private game online or something like that?
I was doing a podcast at the time with a friend of mine, and I don't know, it just seemed like trying to meet people to do this without like an ulterior motive. Like, my brain's like, I don't know if that'll work. How do you just randomly introduce yourself into a game? And I also thought, I don't want to say to people, hey, I want to play this game. Can you run it for me? I want to learn to run it, and then learn to run it for people who may or may not have huge expectations as to how good it will be.
Right.
Let's watch this disaster unfold. And I don't know, it just seemed to be the way I was going at the time. Like, I wish I had a logical, rational, like 10-point, this is why I did it. But no, it just seemed a good idea at the time, and I went that way.
Yeah, I obviously don't need to tell you, but podcasts, I think, are more work than people who don't make podcasts know, right?
Yes, I have discovered this.
Yeah, and I think an actual play is like way more work than what we're doing right now. And you know that because you do both.
I remember in like the early days, I tried to do Foley work, and it's like, no, I can't do this. Like, I'm just going to do my best to make sure the audio quality is pretty good, and that's going to be about it. Because otherwise, that way lies madness, for one thing. And the other is that, I have 2 children. I have a wife. I have a full-time job. And I can't afford to leave my full-time job because, unfortunately, they pay me pretty gosh darn well and treat me pretty gosh darn nice. So I don't know if I'd ever become a full-time creative. So it's like, well, Josh, you can get by on 6 hours sleep, and you should really try and maintain that.
That's true. It is a wonderful thing to create something like this with friends, and to make new friends through role-playing games, and to have the whole experience be this creative endeavor for you. When you said that you played with other podcasters, but they weren't RPG podcasters to begin with, right? Were they?
They weren't, no. Kevin, who is on the Nerdy Things podcast, and he also did Everything Is Fine, which is a Good Place podcast. He'd never played I think he said he'd played D&D once, and he said, yeah, I wasn't sure about it, and so he played with us for quite some time. Tyler, who is still with us, he runs the Discographers podcast and the Talking.Fail podcast as well. And Crystal from Board Game Blitz, she is wonderful. She played with us for some time, and she had never really done a lot of D&D either. We also had Jesse, who was from Your Move, and he was probably the most experienced Dungeons and Dragoner of all of us. And yeah, and my little brother who does not podcast.
It's cool that you get to play with your little brother,
though,
right?
It's nice hanging out with my youngest brother and making sure he's got some good social time.
The thing that I think is amazing, right, is, and I know from our chats and what you said earlier, I want to talk about your Curse of Strahd game. So can you set that up for people? You hinted at the whole Railway Baron thing, but tell me a little bit more about it.
This kind of came about because I saw someone on Twitter posted, hey, what if Strahd was a railway baron instead? And for some weird reason, like I've read the Curse of Strahd book, I've never played in it because my children need a father, my wife needs a husband, and I want to be those things.
Right.
But I was reading through it and thinking, I don't know if I'd want to run this. This is huge. This is really oppressive. And then someone said that, and my brain, for some reason, just immediately latched on and was like, right. And I immediately started just writing up, okay, like, he'd have a magic train, and there's details there that I don't want to get into because, Jacob, I know you're listening.
Hello, Jacob.
But I just immediately had these things in my head, like the railway tracks could be like how a vampire actually drains life out of the land. It's like these iron spikes being driven in, and like that's how he maintains his power and grows himself at the expense of the land. So it's like not just the vampire is like the monster who bites you in the neck, but as the monster who would bite the whole world in the neck if he could. And I like the idea of not just like Slavic fairy tale sadness, Gothic D&D. I like the idea of something with a bit of that silliness that you get in spaghetti westerns.
Yes.
and for some reason, that silliness suddenly just caught a hook in me, and I just started writing. And more was just flowing out of me, and like having the book open and writing and just flicking through and thinking, right, here's a cool system, we could change it over to this. And being able to incorporate, instead of like Gothic content, like bring in references of cowboy movies. Like, we recently finished playing through a section of it featuring 7 undead folk heroes that are now referred to as the Morgnificent 7. And I'm not proud of that work.
I love it. That's great.
Thank you. And I don't know, it just seemed to be like an intrinsically funny idea, but also a way of giving Strahd more motivation. That's not just, I wanted to get with my brother's wife and she said no, so I threw her off a balcony. And I've regretted it ever since. And it just seemed to be more like, well, what if it was really engaging with that whole idea of like colonialism, where you've got a stitch up of different parts of different realms because he is actively stealing them and he's exploiting them. And what does that look like, say, versus parochialism? Warning to everyone, I have a degree in political science, like specifically counterterrorism, and my favorite way of explaining this to people is go read the article called Jihad versus McWorld. It's on The Atlantic. It's a few pages long. It's really good, though. And the idea was to have a D&D game also that explored, well, at what price technological advance versus the parochialism of the natural world. Because these are really cool arguments to have. And they're really cool ethical dilemmas to put on the players. It's like, sure, you saved this town, but here is the benefits and the costs of your solution to this problem. And I wanted to play that out, and I didn't think that ordinary Curse of Strahd would work that way. Because Curse of Strahd is an unending cycle. You kill Strahd, Strahd comes back. And I thought, well, that's kind of dull. Like, I want a problem to be solved, but solved in a way that brings those consequences. So, yeah, that's kind of why I did it.
That is amazing. And I think the adventure, the hardcover adventure, Curse of Strahd, does try to put ethical dilemmas on the players sometimes. But I have often said, like, but you know, the idea that, like, no matter what happens, Strahd comes back kind of makes it all moot, right? Kind of makes it like, well, in the end, the Dark Lord cometh, right? And it's either you get out or you don't, as the players.
Yeah, I mean, I know, what's his name? I think Oliver Clegg. I think he brought out an adventure called A Weekend at Strahd's, where you've got to, like, weekend at Bernie's Strahd, which I think is... I want to buy it just because it sounds silly and maybe get my players.
Yes, yeah. Oliver Clegg and Anthony Joyce worked on that adventure together, and it is great fun, and it is there's a lot of, like, little Easter eggs in there for different Barovia and Forgotten Realms things in there. So I highly recommend that, if not just for the cover art.
I also saw someone tweet out that what we need more in D&D is what they called campires, which is just wonderful camp vampires. And I thought, yeah, that actually sounds fun. I also want to say, being married to a Russian, I get more than enough exposure to, you know, Slavic. Yeah. I don't want to say misery, because it makes it sound like my wife is always sad with me. It's like, no, we get on great. We have a lovely relationship. But I have an understanding of Slavic folklore and fairy tales. It's like, yeah, these never end well.
Yeah, it's very true. It's cool to hear how your degree, your education plays into your D&D games. Because, like, I have a degree in radio and television production, which certainly serves my D&D games in some ways, right?
And what you're doing right now?
Yeah, exactly. So, but also clearly you don't need a degree to learn how to do it very well, because you do it very well. But I think it is always cool to have a dungeon master who knows a lot about sort of the way the world works and the implications of your actions, and even to just have those conversations of, you know, what would a world really look like if diamonds could actually bring people back from the dead, right? For instance, that's just like a for instance, but, like, things would probably change.
I mean, an engagement ring would have a lot of, like, would potentially have a lot more meaning in that case, but also the movie Bloodstone would have potentially been 10 times more nasty. Because, I mean, like, at the end of the day, like, a diamond is a relatively common thing. Like, we can even make them. Like, we've got synthetic diamonds that we can make. So, you know, the synthetic diamond trade would be like, well, how much do you really love your loved ones?
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, it would also potentially be like a form of immortality or something for, like, you know, the upper classes. Therefore, you, like, the supply may be kept artificially, like, you know, really, really low. So, yeah, I mean, you can have a lot of fun with that.
You could, yeah. One thing that I think, right, is all those spells are tied to, like, the worth of the diamond, which I definitely get what D&D is getting at, right? They're not thinking about economics in the sense of, like, if you were really rich and wanted to, let's say I ran a diamond mine and I wanted to kill someone and make sure they stayed dead, I would flood the market with diamonds to bring down the cost so that there were no diamonds worth the price of a raised dead, right? And that's obviously granular and not, like, super fun for all people, but it is fun to think about things like that, you know?
It's fun whenever you look at any system and say, right, how do I break this? Or how do I bend this into a circle so it doesn't break? Like most games I play in, I love to question the physics of spells.
Yes.
Like we had a session recently where a paladin was using Gust of Wind to try and keep a Planetar Angel from attacking us.
Really?
And I made it okay. Prior to the session made the decision that my character in that game, it was time for him to die and become a different rogue archetype. And so I'm like, right, I've got an idea. And the people at this table know that when Josh says, I've got an idea, this might be stupid. It is stupid, but it's going to be funny. And so my character, a Tabaxi assassin, ran up to the gust of wind, leapt, and I argued that, the gust of wind should hurl him forwards so he could clothesline the Planetar Angel and take his ass to the canvas.
Uh-huh.
And the DM's like, okay, it's like, this is a strong creature. It's like, I know it's a strong creature, but I'm 200 pounds of, humanoid. Come on. All right, Josh, give me a grapple roll. Nat 20. The universe has spoken. This was supposed to happen. But it's things like that I think we need to have. Break gust of wind. Break catapult. Use catapult to launch someone in the air at the end of a rope. Have fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
Break it. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I think it's fun to do those things, and I think those are the moments we remember most in role-playing games. And it's interesting because I think the actual play movement, podcasts and streams where people are actually playing have shown more DMs that, right? I know I've been running games for a long time, but watching other people, the chance to as entertainment, listen to folks like you and, Chris Perkins, Matt Mercer, all those people, see these different techniques and see that it's okay to let the players try crazy things and see where that goes and listen to the arguments, right? I love when a player makes a good argument because then I think, yeah, and I let them do it. And I hope it shows the other players that if they can justify something, I will let them be just as crazy, right? Do you find that when you're running a game, particularly, one of your actual plays, do you need to encourage your players to go there? Are they already going there and you need to turn them down?
Tyler does this all the time. Any magical item I let them have a look at, their first question is, right, how can we weaponize this? To the point where in the final episode of our first campaign, they were in a wizard's tower, and I thought, well, he's an isolated research wizard. What would he have? And it's like, well, he'd have a magic plate, the plate of balanced nutrition. That way, you sit down in front of it, it immediately brings up a meal that has your nutritional needs. Some vegetables, some carbs, some protein, and they'd sit down at it, and the meal appears. And they'd throw it away, and the meal would just the plate would magically reappear with the meal on it. And they played with it for a solid 10 minutes, and I'm like, oh, for God's sake, guys, let's move on. The plate's broken. Well done. Good work. Or the fact that they know they're never allowed to have a bag of holding again because the first second they had it, they immediately turned it into a papoose with the monk. Because they were tracking a band of orcs, the monk put the ranger in there and bindled it up so the ranger could follow the tracks and the monk could run after them because the monk's the fastest moving, but the ranger's the one that can follow the tracks.
Oh.
It's like, yeah, no, you're not, no, I don't care what you roll on the magic item table. You're not having one again.
Yeah, you are in trouble with that group. For sure.
Yeah, they're never getting a portable hole either. It's like, no. I know what you're going to do. No, you can't have it. But at the same time,
that is amazing.
At the same time, I want to give them these things. We've all, I assume, heard of the peasant railgun.
Yes.
And it's like, you know what? Go for it. The difference between the laws of physics and the DM is that you cannot break the laws of physics, but the DM's fair game.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true that you can really let anything happen as the GM. I don't know. I feel like a big part of our job is knowing when to let something that sounds crazy that maybe other GMs wouldn't let through are right for your game, right? If that makes sense.
I think it does. I think there's like each table that I play at is very, very different. And I am more likely to say that, look, if you can give me a good justifying argument and you can, I'll probably end up saying yes, because that's a lot more fun than saying no. Like, no, I think should come in where it's like, look, limits aren't bad things in and of themselves. They help shape and define something. Like, if the limit of you can fail was not there, success would be meaningless. I mean, immediately we just get One Punch Man, where it's like, every challenge you face is now meaningless because you can defeat it in one solid strike.
Yes.
Now, if you're the paladin rogue build with like advanced smite and good sneak attack dice, yeah, chances are you could actually defeat most enemies with one punch, and that should be illegal. But by having the ability to know when to say yes, but also knowing when to say no, they know that they can find 11 on the volume dial. My job as DM is to find 12.
Ah, I like it.
It's like, no, you can challenge me on what you like. Go for it. And if I let you succeed, that's fine. Just be aware, the more you step your game up, the more I have to step mine up to meet you.
Right.
And I can do that. And I love doing it. You've given me a reason to actively consider how to make your life difficult.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Tyler. Because it's always you.
Hey everybody, just wanted to take a quick break to let you know that I created an original tabletop role-playing game optimized for Roll20 and published by Roll20. It's called Burn Bright. That's Bryte for Bright. Burn Bright. You can find out more at burnbright.com. It's a sweet, sweet science fantasy RPG. We've talked about it a couple times on this podcast, so you go look at some previous episodes. You can find us jamming on it. It's getting a lot of buzz right now, and I am so grateful to everybody who's already picked it up. If you haven't checked it out yet, burnbright.com, that's Bryte.com, where you can find out what it's all about. You can follow me on Twitter and in other places. The Roll20 blog has been putting out some previews. I've been putting previews over on World Builder blog. There's an actual play out there. There's several, actually, that you can go check out. One that is an official Roll20 actual play with DSPN's own Celeste Conowitch running the show. So amazing. I got to play the game with Fae Forge Academy, and they have the episode available as a podcast. We build characters and then we start playing. So there are lots of awesome ways you can check out Burn Bright. So please do me a favor, go check it out. Burnbright, Bryte.com. Let's get back to the babble. Do you feel like when you play games outside of D&D, like you said, you're playing Lasers and Feelings right now, how do those influence your games of D&D then when you come back to run games or even just play in D&D?
One thing I've found is that whenever I play with this group, I always tend to playing some kind of moron. But whenever I play with like my other group, it's like, no, I play like a pragmatic professional. I would say, look, one thing that has actually really influenced me is with things like, say, Lasers and Feelings and Honey Heist and Goat Crashes. Because what I love about those games is they're stupidly freeform. Like, there's a couple of basic rules, and after that, do what you like. And that's great. And that actually makes me sometimes look at D&D and just ask the question, okay, what don't I need? Like, what can I remove from this? Now, D&D is already really, really streamlined. It's good. It's a good D20 system. And sometimes asking the question, well, which subsystems don't I need, I think is great. But the other thing I really, really like is, say, from Call of Cthulhu or Swordsfall, is the idea of no but and yes and. Like, if you just fail a skill check, I don't think that should be complete failure. I think it should be, like the example would be, you're running to jump over a cliff. You need 12, but you get 11. In D&D, that's a fail. But in a lot of other systems, that's you don't completely pass, but you don't completely fail. Like it would be, you manage to grab onto to a ledge and you're not dead. And so now the team have got another wonderful problem to solve. And that's something that I like to bring into my game, where if you succeed by a little, you get a little bit of information. If you succeed by a lot, you get a lot more information.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like bringing in the rules where there are levels of success like that.
Yeah, I think it's Call of Cthulhu, where you can have like a hard success and extreme success. And when you see that done for a skill, it's like, well, you're reading a book, oh, wow, you got an extreme success. Well, not only did you get the information that you needed, but you got several other contextual bits of information, which are going to be very useful plot-wise later on. And I think that if a DM isn't doing that, it's like, no, my friend, don't go this black and white binary system. Give them more. Let them have it.
Or and give them a little bit, right? Like I love that idea of failing forward, because I do think it also feels like a movie, right? Or a great novel or comic book or whatever, when instead of just falling down the cliff, you grab on to the other side, like you said, and now you're slowly sliding down, or you've got the tree branch in your hand and it's getting pulled out of the tree. Like there's just so much fun to be had playing role-playing games. I love it. I love it, Josh.
It's kind of like there's that line in The Good Place where Jason is talking about, there's times when I have a problem, and then what I'll do is I'll huck a Molotov cocktail at it, right. And then I've got a different problem. It's like, yes, great, throw it. And if you fail, you have a different problem.
Mm-hmm.
But if that problem's more interesting than the first problem, let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know about you, but running games has taught me as a player to like truly embrace failure, especially when it's a big, spectacular failure, because it's like, yeah, this is going to make things more fun and interesting for everybody now.
Like when you try to go and clothesline an angel, and it's like, look, if this fails, what's going to happen is I'm going to go splat.
Right.
But if I succeed, I have the best story of that session.
Exactly. Maybe of any session, and I think that, but like,
but thank you.
Yeah, I play much less precious with my characters because I run so many games, and I, as a GM, appreciate the characters who are fast and loose, shall we say? So I often, not in a disruptive way, but in a way that's like, yeah, this is a game about adventure, right? And adventure stories are pretty boring if Indiana Jones never tries to use his whip to cross a chasm, or cut the bridge in Temple of Doom to try to take on his enemies, right? Like, you need to be willing to take risks like that to get those amazing moments.
Exactly. Like, I think it was kind of the case of like, well, I know this character is supposed to die. Everyone at this table knows he's supposed to die. So yes, he's going to do something really dumb. And if that really dumb pays off, great. It just means his ending is so much better. But make interesting decisions, for God's sake. Now, I mean, if you're playing in, and this is something Grant Howard said to me ages ago, when I interviewed him, if you're playing in a long campaign, yes, be cautious, because you may not get another character for some time, or there's reasons. But if you're playing in a free-form troop-style game, which I am, and you've got a reason to, just throw it all on the dice, take the risk, make an interesting choice, steal the prince, argue with the king, clothesline the angel. It'll be great. Throw it out. Who cares? Like, we have the rogue archetype, the revivified. We have the revenant build. Your character can come back. Your character can be reincarnated. But what else can you offer the story if not a good or great death?
I think that's great advice from Grant and from you for people to listen to. You are online in the RPG community, you have a good, positive presence. We were talking about it before we started recording. It is great to see you. And like, it's one of those things where I see you, you know, like you and I interact online, but then I also see you interacting with and encouraging other people in big ways. You're always making puns, which is great. You know, you talked a little bit about the community before. What does the RPG community mean to you?
It means a lot of people who are working on and creating things all the time that are wonderful and good. There's a lady out there, her tag is FN Dungeon Mom, and she was the creative and everything lead behind a thing called the Wombat Rescue Project, which was a 5th ed supplement that you can go buy, please do, called Wisdom Under Blaze or Wisdom Under Fire, which was a project put together to put money into the hands of a charity after the Australian bushfires. And if I can ask nothing of people listening to this, please go put money on that. Because I was but one of like dozens of people who just volunteered time on that to make something that would put money into taking care of animals. That's a large part of what the tabletop community is for me. It's like people doing cool stuff like that. But also, and this is the dad coming out, people who are using this to escape from things that they can't escape from. And people who it's like, well, when we look at people, we are social animals, and that's cool, that's great. And this is how we connect with people, and we actually, you know, we feed some of that need to be connected with people by making a good, lovely space where people can feel safe and welcome and vulnerable and happy and fulfilled. And that's really, really important. And I love that I get to be part of something that does things like this, because, you know, when I started, I had very, very few close friends because I'd been socially isolating myself. And so over 2 years, I've gone from having not many really good close friends to now having a good couple of dozen really close buddies that I look at and think, my life is so much better for having these people. And at the end of the day, if you can be someone who is a nice influence in other people's life, if you can make them smile and just forget their problems for a few minutes, that's practically a superpower as far as I'm concerned. Terry Pratchett said it wonderfully. He said, it's not what you're escaping from, it's what you're escaping to. And if you're escaping to somewhere that helps you be a hero and you can take any of that back, then bloody lovely. And I mean, when you see how people are actually starting to connect with other people and learn their story as well. Like I'm a fundamentally boring man, and I make no apologies for that. And I've been, because I have an open table policy, unless you're an asshole. Look, that's really the only guiding. That's the really only line where I've had to reject, where I would reject anyone. And fortunately, I've never had to use it, which is great. I've been able to meet people whose stories are so different to mine, and grow and actually become a better human being. So anything I can do to facilitate that, I think that's what we should all be here for. So I'm very lucky. I have people that I love tremendously, and yeah, I apologize I can't say it very eloquently or very well, but because I love these people is why.
I think that's great, and you are certainly not a boring man to me.
Oh God, I am so boring.
No boring than I am. No more boring than I am. It is awesome to have you on this podcast. So, Josh, if people want to find you, listen to your podcasts, where should they go? What should they do?
Just do a bit of a Google search for Nerdy People Play D&D on iTunes, Spotify, all that kind of thing. That'll actually lead you to where the podcasts are. I'm happy to talk with anyone about anything, really. And you can find me on Twitter at Nerdy People D&D.
Excellent. Well, it was so great having you here today, Josh. Thank you so much for joining me on Tabletop Babble. I appreciate it.
An immense pleasure, James. Thank you.
Well, that was an amazing interview with Josh. People, a quick reminder that episode 200 of Tabletop Babble is going to be my last as its host. However, the show will be continuing with new hosts, and you are definitely going to want to check it out as it moves over to the Geekspective network. It is going to be just a lot of fun over there. Kenny and John and Amber are going to be taking over. They will be on this podcast. You will hear their voices before I am gone. And so with that in mind, I'd love you to head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review. I'd love to give them a strong start. I'd love to leave them with a podcast that is doing well and new people are finding it all the time. So as a favor to me, if you've been a loyal listener, I would love it if you head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave Tabletop Babble a 5-star review. Also, hey, I've got a cool project cooking. Burn Bright just came out. It's an original science fantasy RPG that was published by Roll20, and I was one of the lead designers. You can check out more at BurnBright, that's BRYTE.com. There's a lot of fun stuff happening with it. There's actual plays out there. We got a Discord. So go check it out at BurnBright.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at James Introcaso. That's at JamesIntrocaso. Also, check out my blog, worldbuilderblog.com. I've got updates about the game design stuff I'm doing. Previews of My Dad's Monster Manual are going up there, and so much more. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network, and it's edited by Nate Pausenga. Rudy Basso founded DSPN with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by BattleBards. Everybody, roll true.
Hey there, listeners. It's Shane.
And Ishan, your hosts from the Total Party Thrill podcast, the newest addition to the Don't Split the Podcast Network.
We talk topics that help you, dear listener, create and play better RPG games.
We have a back catalog of more than 150 weekly episodes.
And we got nominated for an Emmy for episode 11, Social Contracts.
In episode 154, we talked about crossing the moral event horizon. How evil is too evil?
We also recap our home games, like the 40k Rogue Trader campaign, Dynasty Unwarranted.
But that's mainly just you trying to kill us all. In your defense, our characters are greedy idiots.
Don't forget the 3 years we spent in Eberron playing Morning Glory, your 5th edition D&D campaign.
We also review new RPGs and books, and every episode we build a 5th edition D&D character in the Character Creation Forge.
You might check out the Pint-Sized Punisher from episode 119, a halfling with a bad attitude, and 14 levels of Barbarian.
So to recap, Total Party Thrill, RPG advice, campaign recaps, and D&D characters built by your dashing hosts every single week.
What more could you possibly want?
To get back to the actual show?
Oh yeah, let me just hit this button, and here you go.